Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for a special program with political correspondent and award-winning author Carl Bernstein. Carl, we're greatly honored by your presence and look forward to your talk. Carl Bernstein is widely regarded for having set the standard for modern investigative reporting. In the 1970s, his investigations into the Watergate scandal with colleague Bob Woodward at the Washington Post brought down the presidency of Richard Nixon. The authors recounted the events in two of the most influential books of the decade, All the President's Men and The Final Days. Since then, Carl's work has focused on the common theme, the use and misuse of power, be it political, journalistic, financial, or spiritual. His latest best-selling book, published in 1996, is the acclaimed papal biography, John Paul II and the History of Our Time, which delineates the Pope's key role in paving the way to ending the Cold War. In 2003, he will publish his eagerly anticipated biography of Hillary Rodham Clinton. I think we got some sales. Advance copies. It's not quite finished yet. I can't wait. Over the years, Carl has been a notable editor and contributor to Time, Vanity Fair, Rolling Stone, The New Republic, just to name a few. He has contributed to ABC News, 2020, and Nightline. His very first story from 2020 in the early 1980s focused on, guess what? The Mujahideen, a group that remains so central to the struggles we see today in Afghanistan. In addition, Carl has served as Executive Vice President and editor of Voter.com, recognized by Forbes as the best political website on the internet. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in extending a warm welcome to one of the most fascinating minds of our time or any time, Carl Bernstein.
It's great to be back in Richmond. You're going to have to bear with me a little bit tonight because I've got this terrible cough, and so at various times I might have to go for some hot tea there to try to keep from gagging up here. Let me say a word about Richmond. It's a city I love, and I've spent a lot of time in. I was living here up until the day before the Watergate break-in, because I was the chief Virginia correspondent for the Washington Post at the time. And during the legislative session, I would live here. I lived across from the Jefferson, in an high-rise near the fan. And it is a town that I really came to love, and I've missed it since. I haven't been here much. It is a wonderful, wonderful place, and it's really good to be back here today. And on the day of the Watergate break-in that morning, I did the last Virginia story that I wrote, which is a profile, a very long profile of Henry Howell, who was then running for governor of this great state, and who was a wonderful man. So, it's good to be back. And it's also terrific to participate in this rather remarkable program that's sponsored by this remarkable institution, the Jepson School of Leadership, and the Richmond Quest program itself. And it's certainly a great time to be talking about courage and about leadership, because obviously in the post-Watergate era in this country, both questions of leadership and courage, and obviously leadership itself is a question of courage, seems to me to be paramount in our national life, in how we look at our institutions, particularly the press, and particularly our political institutions. I've been speaking about the use and abuse of media power for some 25 years, through the whole post-Watergate era. But increasingly, I also find myself talking about the culture of Washington where I was born and raised, because I think the people of this nation look at Washington quite rightly as something as a foreign country. And it really has become an alien place, with its own rituals, its own folklore, and its own rhythm, and a rhythm that increasingly, I think, results in less and less really getting done. Something obviously is not working, both in our political system and in our journalism, to an extent that is something to worry about. I think they've both become, to use the psychobabble of the day, increasingly dysfunctional. And I hope tonight, excuse me, that you take what I'm saying in terms of criticism of the press, criticism of our political system as it operates today, in a context of there's still an awful lot right with both. In this country, we still have the best press in the world, far and away. There's nothing close to it. It's the freest press in the world. And the best journalism in the world is being done in this country. And similarly, I believe that the government and the system that we have in this country remains operational, has all the potential that it's always had for the kind of greatness that we've known in this country since the first leaders of this country really came from this state and enunciated many of them from this state. So many of the principles, George Mason's Virginia Declaration of Rights, to the Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson, those basic precepts still guide us. And I suppose that my concern is what I perhaps see as a deviation from those precepts that we've seen, particularly in the last quarter century in our political institutions. But I'm also very hopeful, particularly hopeful, I think, about new things like the internet, which I think is changing the way we get information for the better in many ways. And I'll talk about that in a little while. I think that there's been a kind of renewal in our political system through our history as we've gone through phases where we've moved backwards. We've had a real gift in this country for great leadership stepping into a breach that has come before. And I certainly would hope that we're going to see that. Because clearly, I think, regardless of what one thinks of President Bush or of Al Gore, his opponent in the last election, something is not working if these two men, who overwhelmingly the people of this country did not want to be the nominees for president, ended up fighting each other into a tie for the presidency. There's something wrong with the operation of our system if we know those fundamental facts. That the desires of the people are somehow not driving our politics today. So, that said, let me frame some of what I'm talking about in terms of the press. Recently, I was in Britain, where one would have no apprehension of anything approaching either humility or commitment to a good print reporting. Good journalism in print really is the best obtainable version of the truth. And I'm going to return a number of times tonight to that very basic definition of what reporting is. The best obtainable version of the truth. Very simple concept, a very difficult thing to achieve that requires great effort. Not rocket science, but great effort. And in America, in Britain, increasingly in Western Europe, we're losing sight of that ideal. And in its place, we're seeing the dominance, increasingly, of a global journalistic culture that has less and less to do with the truth, or with reality, or with context. Increasingly, the picture of our societies is rendered in our media, especially in this country, in Britain, is illusionary and delusionary. Disfigured, unreal, out of touch with truth, disconnected so often from the true context of our lives. It's disfigured by celebrity worship, by gossip, by sensationalism, by denial of our society's real conditions, both good and ill, by manufactured controversy of the kind that we see on radio and television every day, and by a political and social discourse that we, meaning the press, media, politicians, and people, have in the post-Watergate era really turned into a kind of sinkhole too often of shouting and ignorance and easy answers to tough questions. Today, in journalism, we limit ourselves more often than the government limits us because we're not willing to do that hard work of good reporting, of searching out the truth. It requires a real commitment of money, of resources, of young reporters who are willing to dig, who are willing to hold the story for a few days and not be pressured into printing too quickly until they really get the story. But that's not our priority often enough anymore. Increasingly, we journalists don't have, and here I come back to the theme of this evening, courage, leadership. Increasingly, we journalists don't have enough courage to give our readers and viewers what we know is real news. Instead, we pander to them, even occasionally in the best of our newspapers and broadcasts, and keep in mind that the standards of the New York Times, or the Washington Post, or Ted Koppel, or Dan Rather, or the Wall Street Journal, those are hardly the standards of most of our journalism in this country today. And meanwhile, with a great deal of arrogance, we have failed to open up our own institutions in the media to the same kind of scrutiny that we demand of other powerful institutions in this society. So that our stake in the myth and its attendant self-image that we're doing a great job is every bit as great a fiction as the notion that the American Congress has been really serving the people well in the post-Watergate era. Over the last 20 years, we've been advocating our primary function, the best obtainable version of the truth, and allow our agenda and priorities to become bastardized and dominated by what I called in a cover story I wrote for the New Republic magazine 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I think, actually, the triumph of idiot culture. And incidentally, there's an account in the school paper here today about some of what I said on that occasion. And I have to say, the young man who wrote it did a hell of a job. Really did. Really a good story. He did all just full of it in what I said, and gave the other guy his argument in a really cogent way. It is a first-rate piece. You should read it. It's really good. But make no mistake about who the most influential figure in our journalism of the past quarter century is in the post-Watergate era. It's not Katharine Graham or Ben Bradley. Katharine Graham, the great publisher of the Washington Post, and Ben Bradley is great editor. It's not Abe Rosenthal, the great editor who created the modern New York Times, which might well be the best newspaper we've ever seen. It's not Ted Turner, who invented CNN. It's not the team from 60 Minutes. The most influential person in journalism of the last 25 years is Rupert Murdoch. And the influence of his Aussie brand of journalism, as seen initially through the New York tabloid, the New York Post, has had huge influence over the rest of our journalism in this country, as has the television show we started, Hard Copy. And the standards that those journalistic endeavors encompass increasingly are finding their way, their sleazy way too often, into the higher ends of our profession. And that those standards can be an even greater threat to the truth than the lying and secrecy of a succession of American presidents or their governments. I know we hear a lot about Dick Cheney and his energy task force and the secrecy of that task force and his refusal to, and the administration's refusal to release the names of who attended those meetings. I would suggest that not only should there be disclosure, but aside from that, there should be a lot less whining by the press and a lot more attempts to find out who the hell is on the list. And my guess is if a few really great reporters put their minds to it, they could find out who 3/4 of those people were. Don't think it's rocket science. But when we forget the basics of what we do, we get edged out by idiot culture and by whining. And we do a lot of whining and a lot of shouting. And I was speaking the other, both Bob Woodward and myself were speaking at the University of Maryland last week. And a very thoughtful student asked a question about sort of packs of reporters shouting questions at people. And I just said, you know, it is no wonder that we are held increasingly in such disregard by so many people. That, because among other things, we don't even have any common manners anymore. I mean, it is so, that is not reporting. Screaming at an individual at a podium. Reporting is going out and finding sources and knocking on doors. I think a number of you who are journalism students saw the movie All the President's Men in the last couple of days. And as you can see from that movie, you know, what we did in Watergate was not rocket science. It was just a very basic kind of empirical, almost police reporting that you first learn when you get into the newspaper business, that I learned when I was 16 years old at the Washington Star. And you persevere. And you let people explain themselves. I think the worst sin today in journalism is that reporters have become terrible listeners and don't want to listen to it. And if I had give advice to a young reporter today, it would be listen. Let the subject who you're covering talk to you. Spend time with that person. Don't go running into him or her with a camera crew, shout a question that you already think you know the answer to, and run out of the room and run back to the television station and put it on the air. That is not reporting. That is idiotic. That is not the best attainable version of the truth. That has nothing to do with reporting yet. It is the norm in too much, if not most, of our television reporting, and certainly in almost all of local television news reporting in this country. So, if we are going to have a kind of journalism in this country that serves the people and serves our system, we have got to do an awful lot more than we're doing. Because today we have dozens of would-be Murdochs in our journalistic culture, whose influence and standards have much more to do with what people read and see than any restrictive legislation in any of our countries in the West, than any of the hiding and secrecy of R.A. Fleischer or the Bush White House. And there's no question the Bush White House is the most secretive White House I have ever seen in 42 years of being in Washington as a journalist. That being the case, our job is not to lie about it. Our job, as I said, is to knock on the doors. And it can be done because you can see there are still great reporters doing great stories, but not enough of them out of Washington, and certainly not enough of them on this White House. George W. Bush remains today an inexplicable figure. Unless somebody here has read something that I haven't. The reporting on the President of the United States, we still don't know who this man is. I suggest that we will soon. I think there's some things in the works that some journalists are working on that will let us know more about who this person is. And I don't mean in a negative way or a positive way. I mean it will go toward informing us who this person is. But meanwhile, let me read you something that I think is indicative of where Murdoch culture has taken us. I quote, "Hotel records show that Maples paid no bills," end quote. That is from the front page of Newsday, one of our better newspapers in this country, not a Murdoch paper. And that day, the whole front page of Newsday was devoted to the story of the breakup of the marriage of Donald Trump, the New York real estate maven, his wife, Ivana, and the role of Mr. Trump's girlfriend, the now famous ex-Mrs. Trump, Marla Maples. That day was also the same day that Nelson Mandela returned to Soweto after his years in the South African Gulag, and the same day on which the Allies of World War II agreed to the unification of Germany. Those stories were inside the paper, and inside 3 of New York's 4 daily newspapers that day, and followed the Trump story on every local New York broadcast that evening and that night. That is the triumph of idiot culture. Tell me, Marla, was it really the best sex you ever had? The words of Diane Sawyer, journalist. On the first edition of the much-heralded ABC News show Prime Time Live, that same week that the world changed so momentously. Diane, who could be a pretty good reporter, did not go to Soweto. Diane did not go to Brandenburg Gate. Diane went to Marva Maples' apartment. That is the triumph of idiot culture. And in this culture of journalistic titillation, we teach our readers and our viewers that the trivial is significant, that the lurid and the loopy are more important than real news. So that too often we don't serve our readers and viewers, we condescend to them, giving them what we think they want, and what we calculate will sell and boost ratings and readership. And many of them, many of you, many people in this country, sadly seem to justify our condescension and to positively kindle at the trash. I still believe that it's the role of journalists to challenge people, not to merely mindlessly amuse them. We're in the process of creating, in some, not just an idiot subculture, which can be a kind of harmless fun, but the culture itself. For the first time in our history, the weird and the stupid and the coarse are becoming more of our cultural norm than our cultural exception, even sometimes our cultural ideal. In America, radio and television shows that thrive on race baiting and intolerance and manufactured controversy are the most popular broadcasts on the air. I don't mean to come here and attack popular culture. Good journalism is popular culture, but it's popular culture that stretches and informs its consumers rather than that which appeals to the ever-descending lowest common denominator. And if by popular culture we mean expressions of thought or feeling that require no work or effort on the part of our consumers, then we're not going to have a thoughtful, vital, vibrant, popular culture in this country. The truth is often complex. The best obtainable version of the truth is partly, maybe even mostly, about context. And that's perhaps the greatest single failing of our journalism and media today. For too much of it, and sometimes, as I say, even most of it, seems to be utterly without context. And meanwhile, this is occurring in a new environment that did not exist at the time of Watergate, which is to say the environment of the 24-hour news channel, and also the environment of a 24-hour internet cycle that drives newspapers in a new way because they have websites. And we've always had problems in our news business of what's more important, being first or being the most authoritative. And often it requires a compromise, and should. But today, the greatest felony for a reporter is to be behind, or to appear to be behind on a story, or in danger of missing a story. So speed and accuracy often get to be, so speed becomes a more important consideration than accuracy, or context, or thoroughness. And in this pressure to compete, the fear that somebody else will make the splash first creates this frenzied environment in which a blizzard of information is presented and serious questions just get glossed over. When Bob and I were talking the other night at the University of Richmond, he said this really interesting thing. He said that in an afternoon, these 24-hour-a-day news channels and their reporters are expected to produce a report that would have us know everything about an event, or a piece of legislation, or what's going on in a particular city or a particular event. You can't do that in an afternoon. So we need some restraint and some context. But looking around at the media landscape today, at talk television, local news broadcasts, they've increasingly have become freak shows. Cross-dressing in the marketplace, skinheads at your corner luncheonette, pop psychologists rhapsodizing over the airways about the minds of all kinds of criminals that they haven't the slightest insight into, as far as I can see. Let me give you a really grievous example. In supposedly sophisticated New York, where I live, the country's biggest media market, they recently ran a craven 5-part series on the NBC owned and operated channel on the 11 o'clock news, involving 5 days in a row the top reporters of the station, advertised as an investigative report, heavily promoted, called "Where Do They Get Those People?" And this was a special report on where afternoon and morning talk shows get their freaks. And the promo for the series featured Phil Donahue interviewing a diapered man with a pacifier in his mouth. The point is not that this is trash television, that much is obvious, but the point is that it appeared on a station owned and operated by NBC, which is also the producer of the Evening News with Tom Brokaw. Now, I know that the standards of the Brokaw broadcast have nothing to do with the standards of the local broadcast that gives you where do they get those people. But most people in this country do not know that. And it is perfectly reasonable for them to assume that the standards of the Brokaw show, being that they both are NBC News productions, are the same. And increasingly, we are seeing on stations owned by the New York Times Company, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post Company, idiocy. And people are not unreasonably going to start saying, hey, if they're willing to put that on their station, maybe they're willing to do that in their newspaper. You can't have it both ways. But it takes courage. And that is what we lack today in our institution, the same way that we're lacking in our political institutions. And this has become particularly true in the last 10 years because of the creation of fewer than a dozen global media oligarchies that now control most of the entertainment, publishing, and news in the developed world. Organizations like AOL, Time Warner, Disney, Murdoch's News Corporation, Bertelsmann, Viacom. And I can include myself as a product of that list. In that list is virtually every organization that I've worked for in the last 20 years, published under, is in that list. And I've been lucky because I've been able to work with particular editors or particular publications within those empires. I'm not including the Washington Post, I'm talking about magazines and television enterprises, etc., that remain somewhat independent. But really, the interest of Disney or Bertelsmann or Viacom in the truth is very secondary to their interest in huge profits. It is totally different than the interest of the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, all of which, incidentally, are very interested in profits, and all of which do quite well. And the good news is that there are still important independent media outlets committed to the truth, which continue to have huge influence. But, like the Washington Post, and ABC, and Congress, and PBS, but also more and more of what you see, read, hear is owned by those 10, 12 companies. And if I have any single message of importance tonight, it's please hard to get the best obtainable version of the truth. Because with a computer and the web, you can put together your own newspaper, consisting of the best of the New York Times, the best of the Washington Post, the best of the BBC. If you want to know about what's going on in Israel or in the Middle East, go to the Haaretz English language site. And then go to an English language site of one of the Palestinian or one of the Arabic newspapers. There is every opportunity today to get more news from independent sources than there has ever been. No one really, except those forced by economic deprivation. And even there, people have access to computers in schools and libraries and elsewhere. But everybody in this country can get the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, not the Journal which you have to pay for, but the Times or the Post, delivered to them for free every day. So the old excuse that, oh, you guys just give us trash, doesn't work anymore. And that gets to this question of, well, sure, we can exercise leadership, but what about the people that we're supposed to be serving? They're eating up this trash like crazy. Yet, ultimately, I happen to agree with the faith of Bill Moyers. When Bill said, people want to know what is happening to them and what they can do about it. Listening to America, you realize that millions of people are not apathetic. They'll respond to a press that stimulates the community without pandering to it, that inspires people to embrace their responsibilities without lecturing or hectoring them, that engages their better natures without sugarcoating angry realities or patronizing their foibles. But by not resisting these trends I've talked about tonight in journalism, we who see ourselves as leaders in the respectable corners of the media are doing a grave disservice by not having the courage to get up and say to editors and publishers, enough already, you are endangering the credibility of all of us. And there are some voices. Ted Koppel has started to say some important things on this. Dan Rather has started to say some important things on this. And I think there's starting to be some awareness among enlightened publishers that they have moved too far in the other direction. A great journalist, Les Gell, wrote in his last column in the New York Times before he left the press to head the Council on Foreign Relations, and I quote Les Gell, "Washington is largely indifferent to truth. Truth has been reduced to a conflict of press releases and a conflict of handlers. Truth is judged not by evidence, but by theatrical performances. Truth is fear of opinion polls, fear of special interests, fear of judging others for fear of being judged, fear of losing power and prestige. Truth has become the acceptance of untruths." In that context, we have largely ignored the most important story in politics in America of the last 25 years. The wholesale corruption of our political system, especially in Congress and the state legislatures. We don't even know how to cover this story because it's so pervasive. It's not about finding a corrupt official or congressman or senator here and there. And maybe that's part of the problem. That we're always looking for one guy who's got his hand in a cookie jar. That's not what this is about, because the system itself has become corrupt, corroded, unresponsive to almost any cause that is not backed by huge amounts of money. Lobbyists, and incidentally, this is even more devastating in terms of the people of this country, in the state legislatures, than it is in terms of the Congress. Because state legislatures are really where, at the level of schools, at the level of all interaction between local institutions and people, the state legislatures are now being bought and sold to the highest bidders. just as the Congress is. Lobbyists are the biggest fundraisers for members of the U.S. House and Senate. They throw the important $500 and $1,000 a head cocktail receptions that are the meat and potatoes of running for office today. Consider this. A big state Senate campaign, say New York or Texas or Florida or California, can cost $50 million or more. John Corzine spent $60 million to be elected senator from New Jersey. That means for an incumbent in the Senate to run for one of these seats against somebody with deep pockets like that incumbent has to spend at the rate of $15,000 to $20,000 for every day of a 6-year Senate term. And the truth be known, that is the single function that congressmen and senators devote most of their time and energy to: raising money for re-election, not drafting and considering legislation on the merits. And it includes the good guys. It's the way our system is run today. The Sierra Club has to compete at the same level as the oil lobby. It's all about the expenditure of money. Are there exceptions? Sure. But money controls our political system to an extent that it never has before in our history, and it has broken it. Modern Washington, Bill Bradley has said, is dominated by money, and money creates, to quote, money creates political campaigns where the candidate does not go out to meet the voters. He just sits there and raises money. Therefore, certain interests are able to marshal huge influence. You have to raise money at a clip of $25,000 a week. Bradley was saying this about 8 years ago. And you never define yourself politically. You're everything to everybody. You convince yourself that you're a great politician when in fact you're a great tactical manager because you commission polls every week or every day. To have polls, you have to have money. And without polls, you feel that you won't have the advantage over everyone else. It becomes naive to actually take positions on issues, says Bradley, except on behalf of contributors. And that's where these big lobbyists come in, flush with campaign cash, most of them lawyers advising corporate clients how to cover their bets around the House and Senate like so many poker chips that they're spreading around the table. In the past 20 years, a whole new city has grown up along the K Street corridor north of Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, stretching from fashionable Georgetown to political downtown. Gleaming office buildings that house more than 100,000 lobbyists, regulatory lawyers, public policy advocates, pollsters, and PR people for these interests. The new infrastructure of corporate special interests especially wield more power perhaps than the federal bureaucracy itself today, because at the very least they dominate the decision-making process in Washington because these lobbies are better organized and better financed, and they have more up-to-date information than our government does. And I don't mean better financed in aggregate, but I mean in terms of their own immediate cause. They have more money to put into that particular bill and get it defeated than any opposition can be mounted by the membership of the committees in the House or Senate. Less than 30 years ago, there were fewer than 100 registered lobbyists in Washington. Today, there are 10,000. And there's nothing wrong with lobbying. Lobbying ought to be a principal, important part of our politics, about the merits, not about how much it costs to buy your cause. But I believe that the American system has functioned magnificently, if reluctantly, in periods of national crisis, from wars to the emancipation, to the Great Depression, to the censure of Joe McCarthy, to Vietnam to Watergate, and it's functioned because of great leadership and courage, especially in the press, which has forced political institutions in this country to respond. And today, more than ever, we need that leadership in the press. For 8 years of the Reagan administration, the press in this country failed to comprehend that Ronald Reagan was a real leader. However asleep at the switch he might have seemed to some people, however shallow his intellect might have appeared to some people, no leader in this country since FDR so changed the American political and economic landscape, or saw his vision of the country and the world so implanted. But in the Reagan years, we in the press rarely went outside Washington to look at the relationship between policy and legislation and money and how this was affecting the people of this country. Children and adults and institutions of America in education, in the workplace, in the courts, in the black community, in the family paycheck. Now, I might not agree with these policies of the Reagan administration, but our job was to see what they were and what they really meant outside of Washington, but we didn't. And meanwhile, in our dismissive ridicule of Reagan's rhetoric about the evil empire, we failed to utterly make the connection between Reagan's policies and the willingness of Gorbachev to institute reforms and loosen totalitarian vice of communism, especially in Eastern and Central Europe. And now that record is slowly becoming known. What I'm suggesting is that when we do our job, when the press does its job, the people are much more able to do their job. And the political institutions of this country have much more pressure on them to respond to the wishes of the people. And then what we're seeing now is a kind of interlocking failure of press, our institutions, our political institutions, and the people. And that we've got to break this cycle. And it has to be broken at all 3 levels. And it takes courage at all 3 levels. We've seen some real courage in the form of what John McCain did. Somebody in the Congress finally got up and said, yes, we're bought and sold. Put a pig on his website with a little tail going like that and said, come look at our pork projects. And all you had to do was go there and see them. And finally, some campaign finance legislation was passed. It's not going to solve the problem, but at least it's the first step. And we still have great reporting in this country. And we need to see that we're doing more of it. And you need to demand more of it and to seek out more of it. And then I think we can go back to what Bill Moyers was talking about and really see that people want to know what is happening to them and what they can do. And we can listen to America and realize that we're not apathetic and that we do respond and that we all have a role in making this system work. Thank you very much.
Here, it's young, believe.
mother is 86 years old and in great shape, and my father is 92 years old, and I saw them both today, and they're both doing great. For those of you in the back who couldn't hear me, it's this question. What is your name?
My name was Molly Perlin.
Molly Perlin.
Yes, my parents were Mary and Robert Perlin, who lived in Richmond, but my mother was from Washington and was a writer.
I got the whole picture. I'll talk to you afterwards. I know who your family is. I know all of them. I know your Aunt Gertie. Okay. Am I right, Gertie? Right. You have to be there. I'm not even going to explain for those of you in the back, but she knows my family from way back. That was really fun. It's the best question I've heard in a long time. Okay. Yes, sir. Are you related to me?
I'd like to know your opinion about the way that Michael Moore goes about giving us information.
The way I think Michael Moore goes about getting his information, Michael Moore being the semi-documentary filmmaker who his first film, I believe, was on General Motors, is that correct? And has recently published a book called Stupid Playpen. Is that right? I don't know that much about Mr. Moore's techniques. But I've seen what I would call it selective documentary editing. No, it's an opinionated form of filmmaking, and it certainly has a place. It doesn't pretend to be neutral, and I think that it has an honored place in the world of ideas and politics and debate. But I don't think it's news. I don't think that it's something. Remember, what we do in this country, the American press, the traditional American press, the so-called straight press in this country has done, it's quite different than a lot of the European presses. That we developed a tradition of trying to be fair in our coverage, of not advocating a particular position in our coverage, but rather of giving the reader the best opportunity to see what available facts there are and come to his own conclusions. Obviously, there's a lot of mythology about that, including this myth of so-called objectivity that journalists have run around talking about for too long. Well, we're not objective. Deciding what is news is the most subjective of acts, and it requires all kinds of judgment, and we bring to that judgment, who we are, but at the same time, we do know how to be fair, and that is the great thing, it seems to me, about our tradition in this country. Let me say one other thing. That lately, if you look at the New York Times bestseller list, you'll see that there have been a lot of right-wing tracts having to do with so-called liberal bias in the press. Bernard Goldberg had a book that reached #1 on the bestseller list. Anybody here read it? Tell me the truth. You really read it through?
Yes, I did.
What do you think?
Well, I think they're biased.
Okay.
I think it's true, and so did I see that about the man Colton.
And you said thought the same man, Coulter's. Okay. I want to think about books. I think there's terrible bias in the press, and I think it has nothing to do with ideological bias. I think the Goldberg book especially is well, one, I think it's barely readable, but that, and the other one is basically a screed. But there is bias in the press. press, and it's time we really looked at it, and it's not ideological, it's geographical. And it is a terrible thing, and it distorts our press. And I think that what has happened, perhaps, is that where people perceive what they think is ideological bias, really, in some instances, stems from this geographical bias. Because our press is far too Washington-centric, far too New York-centric, far too LA-centric. And the constituencies and communities that are represented in those three places. One of the great things that's happened to me in the last 25, 30 years is I get to come and talk to people like you, and I get to do it all over the country. And I spend a lot of time between the two coasts. And I have to tell you, what goes on in this country between the two coasts is so different than what the concerns of so much of our journalism in Washington or New York or LA is about, that you could think you're in a different country, and in fact you are. And we have got to find a way to integrate that news into the rest of the news that is coming out of Washington and LA and New York. And if we don't do it soon, we're going to be in even worse trouble, because that is bias, and that is arrogant. And one of the things that's so arrogant about it is the wonderful things that you see people doing in this country. At the community, at the church, kids. The country itself is very different than what we see, I believe, that we see reflected in the press. If you have any doubt, turn on your 11 o'clock news here. There is not a local news broadcast that I have ever seen in this country that bears any relationship to its own community. It is lead and bleed, as we call it in the business, in every city in America. It is about blood. It is about the odd. It's about what medicine you ought to use. It's got nothing to do with your lives. And it's distorted. And it's not the truth. It's not the best attainable version of the truth. It's damn near the worst attainable version of the truth. It's cockeyed. And that, too, is a geographical bias. And you know why it is? Because it's a manufactured formula that comes out of agencies in New York and LA. That news broadcast has nothing to do with Richmond, Virginia. It is, if you look, eyewitness news, you have eyewitness news here? There's not a city in America that doesn't have eyewitness news. They got eyewitnesses in every market. It's a formula. It is a formula figured out by people who don't know Richmond from Terre Haute. Yes, sir? What do I think of Noam Chomsky's criticism of the media? Noam Chomsky, being an academic whose field is actually linguistics, right? But who has made a name for himself way beyond linguistics with a largely, I don't know if I would call it leftist. I think he's more iconoclastic than leftist, conventionally less leftist. I think he has some very interesting things to say. I think he also is formulaic for me. I think he's shrill. But I think he raises some interesting points. Incidentally, speaking of my father, the most interesting thing I've heard anybody say about an upcoming war in Iraq was said by my father the other day. He said to me, if there was a draft, there would be no talk of a war. And he's absolutely right. There is no way that any of your parents in this room would not be in the streets to stop a war to have you go to Iraq. I have no, am I wrong about this? Does anybody here have a parent that would willingly let you go to Iraq? And I've been to Iraq. You don't want to go there. But there too, where is the courage of somebody to get up in the Congress of the United States and say, you know, we ought to have a draft in this country so 50 or 60% of our frontline guys are not black and Hispanic, and everybody's got an equal shot at getting his head blown off. We would have a very different politics if that were the case. And that has a lot to do with why the anti-war movement was so influential in getting us out of the war in Vietnam. Because it started with kids of draft age to a large extent. It started and it spread to parents, middle-class, conventional people with all kinds of political beliefs. But the draft was a big reason.
Excuse me, sir. If you don't want to fight the war, you should volunteer. If they drafted me now, I'd go, unless I felt strongly. That's one of the wars I'd be willing to fight in. There's some I wouldn't be willing to. I'd be glad to fight in that war.
I listen.
But that's what I'd be willing to fight. If you are probably would.
I think lots of people would. But what I'm saying is that the fair way to do it is to have a draft.
That's fine with me.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
We don't need the draft because we don't need for so many soldiers. We get some smart people, not some stupid people who don't know how to fire a gun, who don't know how to handle machinery and stuff.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Jepson Alumni, I had a hunch that me was biased when I was a student, and then I moved into the political sector, and I started being on the other side of the interviews. And I now know the media can be very biased, and there's a comment that you made that I thought was really interesting. We're talking about lobbyists and buying politicians, and I've been part of that culture. I am a lobbyist, but we are a nonprofit business, so we are only the ones competing against lobbyists who buy politicians. So I see that. But something that you didn't comment on, and I'd love to hear your comments on, is the fact that we're now watching media buy, lobbyists buy media, and that is something that is a new competition. We now, to get airtime, to get the full story, we now feel like we have to support the media.
Could everybody hear that? Basically, the question said that she now works in the nonprofit world as a lobbyist. And that increasingly, lobbying is being done in the media, particularly television, through the purchase of advertising time, which is hideously expensive. And there, too, by that very definition, it means that certain interests are favored over others. And you're absolutely right. And we're going to see more and more of that. Because that, too, is about trying to influence elections. Because a lot of that money is aimed at getting certain people elected who will vote the way these people want them to vote. So your question is right. Yes, sir.
Two questions. One on the same line. If you look at John Cozine as your example, probably the bulk of that went to radio, TV, and other New York Times owned operations. And I think a lot of people get an impression that the press on one hand is saying it's really terrible that all this money has to be spent in order to get elected. And on the other hand, there are analysts touting the fact that they have great quarters for documents coming into the election season. Sort of, who do you believe? Do you believe the analysts touting stocks of the various publications, including the New York Times and Washington Post? Or do you believe the press saying that it's bad and all this money has to be spent on America?
I don't totally agree with your question, but let me repeat it. The conclusions of your question. The question was, here you have people in the press who said, I presume you mean editorial policies of newspapers like the New York Times complaining about the role of big money in politics, and then accepting huge amounts of advertising from the likes of John Borzine, who, if he's running in Jersey, needs to run ads in the New York Times, which costs a lot of money, etc. And is the New York Times more concerned about its stock price or about its purity in its news values? Incidentally, I think the New York Times is more concerned about its purity as a news institution, but obviously it knows, like the Washington Post and other great newspapers, that it has to be a viable business. But it's managed to figure out, unlike other institutions like, say, Gannett, how to be a great news institution and maintain great standards and not strip its newspaper, as Gannett has done to so many good newspapers in this country that it's come into cities and bought. Just rip the hell out of them. They have some good newspapers too, but not many. But no, I don't think I don't think that the thrust of your question is really accurate. I think they are apples and oranges. The New York Times editorial policy has really nothing to do with its own corporate interest, and very often I think you'll see its own corporate interest is opposed by the people who run the editorial page. It's just the way it is, and that's a great thing to be able to say. That, the other thing is that I believe the web is going to change political advertising, and we are finally going to see a drop in the cost of campaigns. Because, first of all, the big costs are for regional television. If you're running for a congressional seat in northern New Jersey, you have to buy New York City television time. That is a fortune. Same thing in Dallas. If you're running outside the district, you gotta buy Dallas time, etc., etc. What's going to happen is that people are going to use the web to learn about their candidates, and I believe, and that you're going to be able, and we were doing some of this at voter.com, a candidate is going to be able to supply to a website like voter.com through advertising, probably, or some of it might not be through advertising, some of it might be a news function, a self-promoting biography, some excerpts from his speeches, his voting record, all kinds of information out there. You can do it for every office in the country, basically, at very little cost, because it's not going to cost much. You're not going to have to pay $2 million to do that on the web, and people in that district are going to look at it. I believe. I think the web is going to. Also, there's a very interesting story in the New York Times Magazine a few weeks ago about, I think it was the magazine, about finally the television is starting to mean less in local elections. And I think that's going to change. I think the web is really changing the way we do a lot of things, and for the better in a lot of ways.
Can you tell us if Deep Throat is still alive?
It's not Dick Helms. All right, the question is Deep Throat still alive? And the answer is yes, because we have said that when the individual known as Deep Throat, is the source that we have, when that individual dies, that we will reveal his identity, because we think it's important, and our obligation there while he is alive, we've said that we would not reveal his identity to him, and we need to maintain our part of that agreement, because that's, what's really sacred in what we do I'm not going to get into the question of what this individual's motivation might be. Sometimes people are heroes. Sometimes they operate totally out of self-interest. Sometimes they have an axe to grind, but they happen to have good information. It can be all kinds of factors. It has been wonderful to be in Richmond again, and I thank you all for a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Carl, we want to all thank you for your tremendous presentation and for taking so many questions. Before you came out, Carl said, you know, I really enjoy this kind of thing. And we know you do. And I hope our audience enjoy it as much as you do. We have a little present, a small token of our appreciation, which is truth, courage, and no whining, all wrapped in one box. It's our college motto. Carl has agreed generously to sign copies of his books in the gallery following the presentation tonight. So anyone who would like